we'll see really what happens now going forward. But what we're also showing on our screens right now is what the nuclear site in Natanz looks like after the Israeli strike. And now you've got US also stepping in. So we're talking about more damage besides just those images that show what happened after Israel hit. Remember that of the 3 nuclear sites that have been hit that we've been reporting on India today, as far as Natanz and Isfahan goes, they've been hit before. They've been hit repeatedly by Israeli forces. And now America also kind of beefing up those strikes on the nuclear sites in Iran. I'll bring in Mr. Pfefferman once again. I hope you can hear me now, loud and clear, Mr. Pfefferman.
Yeah.
So I was asking you earlier, you were suggesting that, Iran takes the hint and kind of backs down. Do you agree that that seems unlikely? Because it will essentially be rather telling for Khamenei, who's already facing threats with so much talk of regime change, that it will show him as a poor leader to his people in Iran if he steps back now.
Well, I agree with your assessment. It's going to be very difficult for the Iranians to step back. However, it would be the smart move on their part. And so what I think we can expect to happen, given how the Iranians have acted to previous, we'll call it escalations. And I have to say, just to jump ahead of the Iranian talking points that we see blowing up on social media, they're trying to pretend that they're somehow passive victims of Israeli and now American aggression. Iran has been waging a war against Israel, against the United States, against its allies for a number of decades now in the region and around the world, using proxies and sometimes directly itself, and also tried to assassinate President Trump. So just to put that ahead of us where we are. I agree with you that it's going to be very difficult for the Iranian leadership to just step back after these crippling attacks on Iran itself, and of course after a week of really devastating and successful attacks by Israel's Air Force throughout the last week on Iran. What we can probably expect to do, and of course there's always the specter of the unexpected in military conflicts, and when you're dealing with a regime that's not entirely rational like the Islamic Republic regime in Iran, is that they will try to find soft points, soft targets that they could hit in and around the Middle East, perhaps shipping, perhaps embassies, perhaps American citizens who have nothing to do with the government. They've done that before. They could do it again. I read this morning that they arrested a German citizen who may or may not be of Jewish descent, and on these, laughable charges of treason. That is something that unfortunately dictatorial regimes like Iran do from time to time in order to show that they're trying to do something. However, if they are smart and if they want to see any kind of regime survival, they will seek an off-ramp from escalating, certainly against Israel, but now especially against the United States. And my sense is this could take a couple of days now for the shock of America's entrance into the conflict, and we'll see the Iranians looking for a way to get out of this diplomatically and maybe save the regime while sacrificing their nuclear program for that sake.
The concern is, Mr. Pfefferman, that this is not some short-term conflict. This is one that will play out perhaps in the weeks to come. And in such a case, if there are strikes, counter-strikes, retaliation, etc., do you also see a regional bloc being formed against Israel, against America? And could that also lead to problems for Israel?
Something interesting that we've seen over the last 620 days of the war, which really wasn't just a war of Israel against Hamas. This was a war against Iran's proxy army. This was an Iran-Israel war that had been launched by Iran and its proxies, waged by the Hamas, which is their Palestinian proxy, Hezbollah, which is their Lebanese proxy, Syria until the fall of Assad, and the Houthis, who continue to fire to this day, and Iran itself on 2 separate occasions prior to last week. And in that entire time, you saw a very interesting and important dynamic, and that is the various players in the Middle East, while chastising Israel and playing along with the ridiculous talking points of genocide and ethnic cleansing that they feel that they have to do every time that there's any kind of conflict between Israel and any aggressor in this region, they didn't actually do anything to side with Iran or its proxies. and they didn't actually do anything practically against Israel. With Iran involved, you have an even more, I think this is going to be a better example of this kind of scenario. None of the countries in the region will actually side with Iran. And the fact that Israel strikes almost entirely and surgically went after the nuclear program, ballistic missile program, military installations, means that the regional countries don't really have to play that game. From what I saw, only the Russians and the Pakistanis made any kind of pro-Iran, anti-Israel statements in this regard. And even Russia's statements called for a de-escalation and were rather reserved. So I think what you're going to see is a lot of ink spilled on the social media and media battlefield. It's going to be very hard for me to see any of the other regional powers or international powers joining on Iran's side, especially now that the United States has gotten involved.
Also, but to the point that you've mentioned about how only nuclear sites have been hit, in the last few days it has gone beyond that too. There have been reports that suggest about 800 people plus have lost their lives in Iran also as a result of Israeli strikes. But just to take forward what I had mentioned earlier about a regional bloc, globally, if this escalates, and you see other countries also stepping in here, Russia, China, their stand, do you foresee any shift in that toward Israel, their stand with regards to what's been happening if this breaks out, into a Western Iran confrontation?
Again, it's hard for me to see that developing beyond the media and social media, maybe the diplomatic battlefield. I don't think the Russians or the Chinese have anything to gain by coming to Iran's aid right now. I don't think the Russians were ever especially pleased with Iran's nuclear program. They saw a way to profit off it. They saw a way to be sort of an intermediary, but it's not as if there's a lot of love in Moscow for Tehran. It seems to always have been more of enemy of my enemy is my friend type scenario. And so again, beyond the rhetorical, it's hard for me to see any country beyond Iran's immediate proxy armies coming to its aid at this time.
Do you also then, see this not taking any sort of a nuclear dire turn, that this won't escalate into a nuclear conflict?
A nuclear conflict between who and whom?
Between Israel and Iran, and perhaps America too.
Well, at this point, and the timing of Israel's strike, which we understand now was actually coordinated with the Americans this entire time, was meant to ensure Iran didn't actually cross that nuclear threshold. We knew Iran that was dangerously close, really a matter of weeks, maybe even days from jumping the enrichment line, from crossing the threshold from 60% enriched uranium, which it had amassed a massive stockpile of 60% enriched uranium, which is not necessary for any kind of civilian means. And the road from 60% to 90% and then turning the gas into a metal, which can be weaponized, the research had been done. And so Iran was getting dangerously close to doing that. Apparently, the Israeli and America had intelligence that Iran was going to cross that threshold. And so the strike was timed in order to prevent Iran from actually having nuclear weapons. And so at this point, as far as we know, Iran does not have nuclear weapons. And now its main facilities and much of its ballistic missile capacity and the weaponization facilities, because really when you're talking about a nuclear weapon, you're talking about a triangle of enriched material, ballistic missiles, and the weaponization mechanism, seems to have been pushed back, degraded and pushed back by a number of years. Now with America's involvement, maybe even 10 or 20 years.
And considering we've seen the 3 nuclear sites being struck, Israel and US have maintained that their target has been Iran's nuclear sites. With that being done, hopefully we will see the end of this conflict. But looking at what we're seeing and how Iran has been responding looks unlikely for now. Thank you so much, Mr. Pfefferman, for your time, for joining us here on India Today with your analysis of what could play out in the days to come.